Hey, God's peace. My name's Andy Rasman. This is start of a series on Martin Luther's Small and Large Catechism. This initial video is just an overview of Luther's Catechism, small and large. First question to address is, why did Luther write these catechisms? All right, so why did Luther write the small catechism? Small catechism came first. Luther made official visitations of congregations in electoral Saxony and Meissen from October 22nd, 1528 to January 9th, 1529. And what he saw was appalling to him. This is the opening preface to the Small Catechism. The deplorable, wretched deprivation that I recently encountered while I was a visitor has constrained and compelled me to prepare this catechism, or Christian instruction. So the word catechism largely has just been taken to mean Christian instruction. And a lot of different church bodies have catechisms. The Roman Catholic Church has the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Presbyterians have the Westminster Catechism written by John Calvin. There are catechisms. Oftentimes these catechisms are delivered in question answer format, usually very concise, specific answers that can be easily shared orally. You got to remember, 1500s here. Maybe not everyone could read and write, but hopefully someone educated in the household asks the question, gives the answer. People in the family remember this answer, and you can teach the faith by, what is baptism? Answer. Here's the answer what baptism is. That's how the catechisms and most denominations that have what they call a catechism is written. And I would argue every church body has some sort of Christian instruction. They just maybe don't all call it a catechism. So what he saw, this deplorable state in these visits he made to these churches, led him to write this catechism, Christian instruction, in such a brief, plain, and simple version. Dear God, what misery I beheld! The ordinary person, especially in the villages, knows absolutely nothing about the Christian faith, and unfortunately, many pastors are completely unskilled and incompetent teachers. Yet supposedly they all bear the name Christian, are baptized, and receive the Holy Sacrament, even though they do not know the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, or the Ten Commandments. As a result, they live like simple cattle or irrational pigs, and despite the fact that the gospel is returned, have mastered the fine art of misusing all their freedom. So in Germany, part of and where Europe was very much tied to the Roman Catholic Church, where the Roman Catholic Church essentially was almost like a government over all the local princes and whatnot. And so the Reformation brought a return of this gospel, which you see Luther name here, and these churches in Germany then breaking from the Roman Catholic rule and order. And someone asked Luther to come out and make a visitation, because what they're seeing is that what's going on out here isn't good. Luther, you need to come and see what these churches are like and what's going on in these villages. And he goes, oh man, these people, through centuries of Roman Catholic rule and teaching, they don't even know the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, or the Commandments. And from what I understand, the services at that time were not in German. It was in Latin. So, yeah, what are these people going to be learning? They don't know anything about Christ, although they take the name Christian. So the catechism is to help make an easy, plain instruction of the Christian faith to these people. So the structure of the catechism that Luther wrote, for three main parts. First part, the Ten Commandments. Second part, the chief articles of our faith. Third part, the prayer which Christ taught us. So 10 Commandments, the chief articles of our faith are presented in the Apostles' Creed. And then the third part, the prayer which Christ taught. And these three follow a very good logical order. The 10 Commandments show us what God commands and expects of us. When we look at these commandments, we see that we've fallen short of his expectations. We have sinned, missed the mark. Second part, then, the Apostles' Creed shows us how God has saved us, how the three persons of the Trinity work in our salvation. saving us from our sin that brings us eternal damnation, what we should deserve from our sin. Third part then, once you have received this salvation by grace through faith in Christ, the proper response is to pray, to give thanks to God. And this prayer that Christ taught us, the Lord's Prayer, is also a guide then on how we ought to live our lives as God's redeemed people here on earth. And also, I would just like say, usually when you, if you're not if you're not coming from our sort of understanding that faith is a gift from God, if you're coming from like a Baptist background, non background, Pentecostal background, a lot of people from these groups have what's called the sinner's prayer. So it's when the person converts, one of the first things they then do is to pray. They would say that prayer, is I guess, not all, but it's oftentimes presented as a prayer that is the conversion prayer. And I would just say that they already had faith, but then they make a prayer. So once you receive and hear a gospel, receive in faith, you pray, you give thanks to God. You say, yes, Lord, forgive me, and you're forgiven. Then Luther, after those three parts, has concerning baptism and concerning the sacrament, which would be communion. The small catechism places confession between the two sacraments. So there's an explanation of confession and absolution between the two sacraments. And the large catechism places confession after the two sacraments. I don't know why that order has changed with the small and large catechism. But that's the structure of how Luther is presenting the basics of the Christian faith. Now, there may be some people that want to go, why go over the Ten Commandments? Why go over the Creed? Why have to memorize this stuff? To this, Luther says in his preface, those who do not want to learn these things, who must be told how they deny Christ and are not Christians, should also not be admitted to the sacrament, should not be sponsors for children at baptism, and should not exercise any aspect of Christian freedom, but instead should simply be sent back home to the Pope and his officials, and along with them to the devil himself. Moreover, their parents and employers ought to deny them food and drink, and advise them that the prince is disposed to drive such coarse people out of the country. Now that is quite harsh, quite harsh. But you gotta recognize, I guess, the time, the context. I mean, this is a time where the government itself was Christian. And you have to realize too that if you're not wanting to learn the basics of the Christian faith, what God expects of you in the Ten Commandments, who the persons of the Trinity are, what they do for you in your salvation. If you don't want to know the Lord's Prayer, how Christ himself taught us to pray, if you don't want to know any of this stuff, you shouldn't even have the physical sustenance. If you don't want this stuff, you do not want life. If you don't want life eternal, why should you have physical life now? Go on and be with the devil where you want to be. Anyways, pretty harsh, pretty extreme for our cultural context and how we practice. But this was it. Luther in the small catechism. And then afterwards he wrote the large catechism. Small catechism, very much designed for the head of the household to use to teach and instruct, but also the pastors. And then the large catechism, much longer explanations on these parts in the small catechism, and were actually to be used as resources and guides in giving sermons, and which was the practice. The catechism should have been preached on multiple times. The topics within the catechism would have been sermons throughout the year, multiple times a year, which, I mean, from my understanding, they would go to church a whole lot more than just on Sunday. So yeah, you need a lot of different things to be able to preach on, and one of them was the catechism. And the large catechism was a resource for doing that. Anyways, that's the introduction to the catechism. We're going to then dig in the next video in this series looking at the first commandment. God's peace be with you.